Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff about the Libertarian Party and its current iteration, specifically after the Mises Caucus takeover that occurred a couple years ago. Those people are basically in control of the party now, but they actually didn't succeed in getting their guy to be the nominee. So the Mises Caucus Libertarian candidate, whose name I believe was Michael Rechtenwald, he was the Mises guy.
Michael Rectum Balls?
Yep. Unfortunately,
Rectum Walls?
You're not going to be hearing much more about Mr. Rechtenwald because, like I said, he did not clinch the nomination. The Mises Caucus came up short in that regard. Before we get into that, though, I do feel like it's important, despite the fact that I mostly agree with everything you said about the Libertarians, Zach, I do feel like it is worth giving them a tiny bit of credit here because they did beat the allegations of basically just being another front for, modern Trumpism or MAGA, an offshoot of MAGA. A lot of people, when they think libertarians, they do just kind of assume like, oh, these are just Republicans, but even crazier. And ultimately, they're probably going to vote for Donald Trump. Well, that's not necessarily the case. I do think it remains to be seen if some of these Mises Caucus people end up voting for Trump instead of Chase Oliver, who is, in fact, the Libertarian candidate. But at least at the convention itself, Trump was not greeted warmly. He was not greeted with rapturous praise and cheers and the sort of sycophantic behavior that he's used to wherever he speaks. No, instead, as has been shared across Twitter and the internet, he was in fact meted with boos. He could barely get through his speech without tons of booing and jeering from the crowd, making it very clear that they're not happy with Donald Trump, that at least most of them do not plan on voting for Donald Trump, and that they don't actually really think that he's a libertarian, probably mostly because of the fact that he made the deficit go up, and then the COVID stuff, of course, which is a big thing for a lot of these libertarians, and a big part of the reason why they briefly considered nominating RFK Jr. despite his lack of libertarian credentials. It was the vaccine thing and his skepticism of big pharma that in some libertarians' eyes made him a worthy candidate. But anyway, I did just want to say that they did beat the allegations of just being like a pro-Trump MAGA front. Clearly, they at least have some principles which elevate them above, the rest of the MAGA electorate, which doesn't really have a political ideology at all, seemingly.
I guess that's fair. Having a terrible ideology that you're committed to, but not rank authoritarianism. I was like, there are more things I could probably find in a vacuum that I agree with, like a true libertarian on, than I would with like a true MAGA Trumper, given the fact that I would be like, let's abolish the police. Let's reimagine, prison and reform in this country. Like, let's open
legalize
the borders,
drugs,
expunge criminal records of people who were nonviolent drug offenders. All that kind of stuff. Whereas like the MAGA people, it's just like whichever direction Trump decides to guide them, and they're happy to contradict themselves over and over and over again. Let's go ahead I know we played it on Circle Jerks, but let's just go ahead and play that glorious clip, of Donald Trump. Absolutely wonderful. And this is a guy that doesn't take boos well. This is a guy that his ego is extremely fragile and it's tremendously large, and they're basically doing the equivalent of throwing tomatoes at him. This is the most horrifying day of Donald Trump's life, and you could see he does not take happily to it. He's like, whoever signed me up for this, whoever told me this was a good idea, fired. You're fired. You are fired. Fired. Anyway.
Yeah, let's take a look.
That's nice. That's nice. Only if you want to win. Only if you want to win. Maybe you don't want to win. Maybe you don't want to win.
He's triggered. You mad, bro?
Thank you, D-Roy.
He's like, you may be booing me, but at least I'm not a loser like you guys. 3% of the vote. Lame.
Sad.
Yeah, sad.
Thank you. No, only do that if you want to win. If you want to lose, don't do that. Keep getting your 3% every 4 years. The reasons for doing so.
I love how Trump can't help himself. There's one more clip where he gets booed even way worse than this. It all builds up before he basically gets booed off. He gets booed off the fucking stage at the Libertarian Party convention, which I guess, as Gavin pointed out, is a W of sorts. Anybody who boos Donald Trump off stage is kind of, friendly in my book. Anyway,
I did want to ask you also, Zach, kind of going back to the question Pondering Politics, or the statement rather, that he super chatted about the libertarians recognizing MAGA authoritarianism. I wanted to ask you if you think it was a good idea from the libertarians' perspective to invite Donald Trump to their convention, because while they certainly beat the allegations, like I said, of just kind of being a front of, MAGA supporters, or actually we're just crazy right wingers, whatever, they beat those allegations. But what I am kind of worried about from their perspective is that this whole Trump getting booed thing massively, majorly overshadowed the news that they actually nominated someone themselves who's not Donald Trump, who's not RFK, who's this guy, Chase Oliver. But again, I don't feel like anyone knows about that because the media was just so focused on Donald Trump getting booed.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody, I'd never heard of Chase Oliver. Before this, I don't think he got too much attention. The guy that I paid attention to the most by far was that, the rectum walls guy. Middle school must have been fun for that guy. That's why he became a libertarian. He had to win them over somehow. Anyway, Chase Oliver, yeah, he doesn't get any of the limelight. There were a couple of stories that came out after the convention. One was the Trump booing. The other was that RFK got 2% of the vote, not as much as people had been expecting. And then that the, Mises caucus or whatever had kind of fallen to, this other guy. But that also, once you start talking about shit like that, that's not going to have mainstream translation. People don't know about that. Most people, if you said Mises caucus, they'd be like, what the fuck is that in Congress? And you'd be like, no, it's these weird ass libertarians that have horrible politics. And you're like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? So I don't think that they're going to have much mainstream crossover. I think that it's still going to be a harder hill to climb. And, 2016, both for the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, I think, are the most recent benchmark of decent success, when they had Gary Johnson and he was able to kind of get a national platform. I think he went on the Joe Rogan podcast during his presidential run.
I think Joe endorsed him.
Yeah, exactly. It was one of the first times Joe decided to get obviously political, and he hadn't had the whole mainstream breakout of the JRE yet, but it did seem like they were able to ride. I think the Chicago Tribune actually endorsed Gary Johnson or something like that in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, because they didn't endorse Hillary or Donald Trump, which I thought was really interesting. People can fact check me on that, but I'm almost positive there was a big Chicago paper that did. Anyway, so they had a decent amount of momentum that they then squandered. The Joe Jorgensen campaign didn't really go anywhere. The Howie Hawkins campaign didn't really go anywhere. Yeah. So I do think that they had a missed opportunity to take some of this and turn it into, more legitimate press for their guy, the candidate that they've decided to go with. But also maybe just talking about the Libertarian Party and getting them that kind of exposure is what they were going for, because they only have one candidate to vote for now. If you are a libertarian and you're like, oh, well, I did like this whole fanfare for the Libertarian Party, maybe I'll check it out. But that seems like a little bit of maybe reaching. I don't know.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Let's look at Dave Smith's response on Twitter to the nomination of Chase Oliver, because there's some interesting details in here. Dave Smith is a big Mises Caucus guy. As I was talking about, they took over the party a few years ago, but failed to actually make one of their people the Libertarian nominee. Dave Smith actually kind of took credit for that here. This is an interesting tweet for a variety of reasons. For one, there's some funny inaccuracies here. He says the Mises Caucus set out on a mission to bring the Ron Paul revolution into the Libertarian Party. Again, I always think it's so funny that they love referencing Ron Paul. They can't shut up about those admittedly glorious moments from the 2008 debate stage where he was able to, kind of call out the, warmongers of the Republican Party and stuff. But again, that happened with Ron Paul running as a Republican. Yeah. So it's like you can't get that effect. You're not going to ever be able to replicate that effect unless you send someone of Ron Paul's credibility to the Republican Party stage, not your little convention that unfortunately no one pays attention to. And again, I say that as a third-party guy myself, but it is true. It's pretty funny that they consistently masturbate to the memory of Ron Paul's 2008 presidential campaign, which again was not as a libertarian. Anyway. He said to shed the party of goofiness, wokeness, and corruption. That's the mission, I guess, that they set out on. And a lot of that was inspired because of the fact that Gary Johnson was too woke in the eyes of a lot of libertarians, or he was too much of a liberal. He was too willing to kind of jump on the Trump is a is a bigot train, which again was just obviously true. And of course, what's his face? Gary Johnson got a lot more votes than Joe Jorgensen, who came after.
It was way more successful. That's why these fuckers can't help but get in their own way constantly. Like, isn't it the Libertarian Party of like New Hampshire or some shit that constantly tweets out ridiculous shit like we want to abolish the age of consent and we think that 12-year-olds should go back to the factories and all this kinds of stuff. Absolutely crazy. That makes sense because I saw a random Dave Smith tweet where I think it was that Chase Oliver guy tweeting out that they were gonna, stand against like prejudices or something. And Dave Smith is like melting down because he said the word prejudices, and it's just so fucking hilarious. I'm like, oh my god, you guys are all just closeted anti-woke people, and you just get triggered whenever you see a trans person, and this is what it all fucking boils down to.
Yeah. This is a quote tweet of Chase Oliver's vice president, who I guess is named Mike Termott. And yeah, he put out a pretty innocuous tweet saying that the Libertarian Party is against all forms of what is it? Prejudicism, whatever.
Prejudicism.
Yeah, that sounds like a fake word.
Yeah. Jakes.
Either way, this is the kind of innocuous stuff. This is the kind of innocuous stuff that people like Dave Smith and Mises Caucus Libertarians think is holding back the Libertarian Party, which is hilarious because, as I said, Gary Johnson, despite only getting 3% of the vote, I think did significantly better than your average Libertarian candidate because of the fact that he kind of did appeal to normies. Like when people wanted to protest vote in that election, they didn't feel like Gary Johnson was some fringe, hateful, alt-right sort of figure. They were like, oh, this guy was a former governor. He likes legal weed. He seems pretty cool. That was the appeal to Gary Johnson. As far as Joe Jorgensen went, she definitely wasn't a good candidate, but it wasn't because she was against bigotry. Like, she just kind of sucked at communicating. She wasn't really inspiring or charismatic. But the problem with Joe Jorgensen was not that she was
presidential candidate named himself after a My Little Pony character.
Yeah, and honestly, Spike Cohen would have probably gotten more votes if he had been the actual presidential candidate.
He's a smart guy. I don't know why he did that. Like we've had good debates with him back in the day. Like I just was like, dude, why did you do that if you wanted to have a serious political career?
Right. It's pretty odd. He was definitely a bit of a troll, but he was running with Vermin Supreme at first. You have to remember.
That's true, I guess.
He probably didn't even really think he was going to get that far. But anyway, he says, Dave Smith goes on to say, blah, blah, blah. This weekend, we retained control of the Libertarian National Convention while re-electing Angela McArdle, who's Mises Caucus, who is a phenomenal chair and put on the best convention in the party's history. Unfortunately, we lost the big one, and there's no getting around that. And this is where he actually takes credit for the Mises Caucus losing the nomination. He says, I can't ignore the elephant in the room here. This is all my fault. When I was planning on running, there was tremendous enthusiasm and energy amongst our ranks. When I pulled out for family-related reasons, it pulled the rug out from under our guys, and we weren't able to recover. So this is another kind of annoying Libertarian Party tradition where before the actual convention, one guy who might actually sort of kind of have a chance of doing something pretends like he's going to run, but then backs out at the last second. I guess we have this with the Green Party too. Jesse Ventura in 2020, Cornel West in 2024. This always fucking happens, right? But last time it was Justin Amash. He, of course, was a representative that changed his party affiliation to Libertarian, and then a lot of people thought he was going to run for the Libertarian Party nomination in 2020. Could have been a formidable third-party candidate. Ultimately decided not to. Same thing here with Dave Smith. He's probably easily the most kind of prominent online libertarian commentator, and he has a bit of a following for his comedy, I suppose, as well. So a lot of people were like, oh shit, the Libertarians might actually have someone. This guy could actually be a serious candidate in the way that Joe Jorgensen, for example, was not. But Dave Smith also at the last minute decided, due to family issues or whatever, which is always the excuse, that he couldn't run, which left the Mises Caucus, I guess, in a bit of a lurch, scrambling for a nominee who ultimately was Michael Rechtenwald. That guy didn't pull it out. And now Chase Oliver, the woke candidate, won instead.
Yeah, it's almost like Sacha Baron Cohen went undercover and infiltrated the Mises caucus and was like, "Ah, yes, I will run as the Michael Wreck My Balls, and we will get to the party to vote for me." Like, you're very nice. I don't know. It's crazy. You couldn't have picked a shittier candidate. If Dave Smith, thinks he could have won and it's all his fault, it's giving Aaron Rodgers energy. If I don't go out there and perform like I know I can, then we're probably all gonna get fired. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, dude, why don't you? Well, you haven't played well in fucking good long while. Last season, you didn't even play. So it's real easy to come back and talk and be like, it's all on my shoulders. It's like, bro, you were sitting on the bench last year. Dave Smith, he didn't run. I could have pulled it together. Oh, there were so much. Well, you didn't, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I could have, should have, would have. Everybody hates that guy. It's like, yeah, bro, probably would have won in the Olympics, but I didn't even try out. I would have gotten first. Yeah, Usain Bolt. Yeah, he's fast. He's fast guy. But they never seen me when I'm moving. You know what I mean? It's like about scheduling and my family. I didn't have time to train. I didn't make it to the qualify. You know what I mean? It was a shin splint season, all kinds of. What I'm saying? It gives that energy. It's like, oh, bro, yeah. If I'd gotten out there, bro, I would have been starching these youngins on the court. You know what I mean? Like, shut up.
Yep, I agree. Let's take a look here at Dave Smith this morning, actually on Breaking Points, where he outlines a few of his criticisms of Chase Oliver and why he thinks he represents a too woke strain of libertarianism, which again, I think is hilarious. If anything, this guy not being a right-wing culture war freak, I think will help him. But who knows? Maybe Dave Smith knows more about this faction of the country than I do. I would suspect he probably does.
Write these things off. Dave, I did want to ask you then about the eventual developments, because there's been a lot of discussion about this. Libertarian nominee ended up being Chase Oliver. I know there's been some, backlash, I guess you could say, from more of the right-wing culture people who are out there. Probably not were going to be libertarians themselves, but I wanted your reaction as somebody involved in the party. You were talking to us previously about some of the schisms that have developed. So maybe give us a taste of what was going into this, what the ideological fractures in the Libertarian Party look like, and then give us where Chase Oliver falls within those ideological fractures.
Well, so my faction, which is the Mises Caucus, is just broadly speaking is Ron Paul. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then there's kind of a faction that might be more Gary Johnson. Yeah, this is a little bit sloppy. The Ron Paul thing is a better comparison, but then there's kind of people who are just in the middle of the party, and then there is what's more the left portion of the Libertarian Party.
Portion of the Libertarian Party? Fucking come on, bro.
Hey, to be fair, I remember when we interviewed Vermin Supreme, and he was like, technically there is a socialist caucus in the Libertarian Party or something like that, which makes it sounds like a total contradiction. But I think there is technically a small faction of libertarians that really do consider themselves like, socialist libertarians or something like that.
Yeah, but you're organizing in the absolute shittiest fucking possible party to do that, right? They'll be like, oh, we're Kropotkin social anarchists, we're true libertarians, we're European libertarians. I'm like, yeah, then get the fuck out of the American Libertarian Party, okay? Because they're all fucking anarcho-capitalist crooks.
Yep. I mean, I definitely don't defend it on a strategic level.
Yeah,
was always firmly in the kind of woke libertarian camp. He moderated that message a lot for this campaign and didn't really talk about a lot of those things that he had previously been talking in the kind of woke portion of the Libertarian Party. Chase was always firmly in the kind of woke libertarian camp. He moderated that message a lot for this campaign and didn't really talk about a lot of those things that he had previously been talking about a lot. Basically what happened is the Mises guys, my guys, were the biggest demographic in the room, but not a majority. And so our candidate was winning every single round.
So much that they band together because they were so afraid of what the fuck we would put forward and what kind of damage we would do to the national reputation of the Libertarian Party that everyone else went to the other guy just because they couldn't stand the thought of our guy being the representative of the Libertarian Party. So you are so unwell, like outside of your little, dare I say, clan of individuals in the Libertarian Party, right? Everybody else, even amongst your own ranks, is like, oh, we don't want those guys to get into power. I guess we'll all run over here to this Chase Oliver guy. Our disagreements be damned.
It must be later in the interview, but at one point he mentions that
I do think he has other positions that are going to be complete non-starters with the overwhelming majority of people who might consider voting Libertarian, and things that I personally believe are not the correct Libertarian position. But even if you thought they were the correct Libertarian position, objectively are non-starters for huge portions of people who vote Libertarian. I have things like open borders, being very woke on the trans kids issue. I think not supporting surgeries, but supporting chemical castration or whatever fancy word they're calling it now. Gender affirming care. But, just things that are, I think, really out there. He, look, I don't want, the guy just got the nomination, so I'm not trying to tear him down immediately. And also, I don't want to be a sore loser because my guy lost and he won. but I don't see how it's gonna be a year where the Libertarian candidate gets a lot of votes.
Oliver is in favor of open borders, which again, sounds like a somewhat
libertarian principle.
Yeah, legitimate libertarian principle of not letting governments decide where we can and can't travel as human beings who all share the same fucking earth, right? And then also trans issues. Apparently, Chase Oliver is not a total freak when it comes to issues of trans healthcare for children and stuff. He's actually supportive of families having the chance to decide what to do for themselves with their own doctor, which again sounds very libertarian to me. Why would you want the government involved in healthcare decisions? Why would you want the government telling parents how to raise their children or telling doctors what the correct thing to recommend to a patient is? That's ridiculous. Again, to me, that seems totally libertarian in the sense of the word that appeals to me and my sensibilities. But I guess a lot of these more Mises Caucus libertarians, they want to appeal to the right wing on a cultural level. They want to engage in the culture war more from a right-wing perspective, which again, I don't think that's necessarily a good idea from an electoral standpoint. It seems like those folks are already voting Republican. Let's get into a few more details real quick on this Chase Oliver dude, because there are some interesting and I guess you could say somewhat unexpected elements of his campaign that I thought were worth bringing to people's attention. Again, just given the fact that there are various strains of libertarianism that are all kind of competing to become the main faction. Let's take a look at this Twitter thread from Edinger Mintum. It says, just learned that the GA Libertarian guy who sent the Senate race last year to a runoff is the national nominee right now. So this Chase Oliver guy, you guys might remember him from the Georgia Senate runoff. He was the Libertarian Senate candidate in Georgia that actually forced Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock into the runoff election, which Warnock did ultimately win. This guy says he's a 2010s Reddit social liberal libertarian. Jesus Christ, that's quite a description of someone's politics. A social libertarian through and through. Some people are going to go crazy for him. He's gone on right-wing podcasts to defend Drag Queen Story Hour. His website has way more on social and foreign policy than econ stuff, which is probably smart. Sadly, he supports a balanced budget amendment, pro-choice, but also pro-Hyde, and not explicitly pro-Roe. What is his plan? That's interesting. I didn't get a chance to look at the abortion section of his website. But yeah, he's also gay, which is interesting. He supports the Second Amendment, obviously. I think his tagline is gay and with a gun or something like that. Just kind of cringe. But either way, at least he's not quite as much of a weirdo as some of the Mises people. He's, like I said, pro-trans, stuff like that. And also, probably the most important aspect of his campaign is that he is really good on Israel, and he's adamantly against the facilitation of the genocide in Gaza, which he does refer to accurately as a genocide. So I guess that's pretty cool too.
Yeah, the libertarians definitely could have done worse, which is why it's hilarious that people like Dave Smith are malding like it's the end of the world, that they have somebody that's within the realm of reasonable. I mean, at least with the caveat that we're already talking about the Libertarian Party, so there's an end to that, level of reason at some point. But anyway, yeah, absolutely crazy. It'll be interesting to see how this guy performs, given the fact that, if he is a, ceasefire candidate, if he is a, more reasonable libertarian, maybe he will be able to successfully poach some votes from Donald Trump. Although I think it does go back to what we were talking about earlier, which is that he doesn't seem to have a huge national profile. But if he could send a Georgia race to the runoff from the Senate election, maybe, the campaign can get off the ground and he'll knock some doors. I'm not saying it's going to be a rollicking success, but I won't even say that there's a pathway for the guy to get 5%, because I don't think he will. But I think there might be a path for him to get like 2.5%, which would be enough to sway potentially an election.
I'm interested
depending on where those votes come from.
I'm interested if this is the first election cycle where the Green Party candidate actually does better than the Libertarian candidate, because I do feel with RFK in the race, he's really going to suck up a lot of that like more right-leaning third-party energy that would traditionally go to the Libertarians. You couple that with the fact that Chase Oliver is apparently pissing off a lot of the Mises Caucus people, so he might not even get all the Libertarian votes, and the fact that, like you said, he just has very little profile, even compared to someone like Jill Stein. I do think we actually have entered the realm where it is a possibility that Stein gets more votes than Chase Oliver, although who knows, maybe this guy does kind of blow up and, develop a following.
Yeah, I hope that Stein turns out more votes, but I just think historically we've seen more success from the Libertarian Party, just even in the, backstepping years. Like obviously Joe Jorgensen outperformed Howie Hawkins, comparatively. But yeah, it'll be interesting to keep an eye on. I always think it's hilarious when, libertarians reveal themselves to just be culture warriors who really don't want to pay taxes. Like that's the end of the game for them. That's all it is. It's like, oh, I really don't want to pay any taxes. I'm not going to pussyfoot around anything. I don't believe in taxes. I'm very selfish. I only care about taking care of myself. And that's my politics. You know what I mean? So anyway,